Last week, I posted an episode of Nihon no Konyo Henshokai where I talked about a bunch of Japanese Yu-Gi-Oh games that I've gotten over the past several months. So I figured I would continue that trend by doing another episode talking about Yu-Gi-Oh games that I've gotten in the recent couple months, I guess, maybe a month and a half, maybe. Not that long. But if you saw the video, the Retro GameCon video, I got a bunch of Yu-Gi-Oh games at Retro GameCon, and I'm sort of in an era of collecting all the Yu-Gi-Oh games. So there's a bunch of games I got here, and then we're going to make a little series out of this. So there was an episode last week about Japanese Yu-Gi-Oh games. There's no Japanese Yu-Gi-Oh games this time, but there's a bunch of games for a bunch of different systems, and maybe we'll do one more episode next week. So before we get into games that I got, Yu-Gi-Oh games that I've gotten in the past little while, I talked in Retro GameCon about a Pojo magazine that I got at Retro GameCon. It was like $2. I didn't have that magazine when I was growing up, but it reminded me of the one that I had growing up. So naturally, after recording that Retro GameCon video, I was like, I'm going to track down the one I had. And so I did. This is the 2006 unofficial Yu-Gi-Oh! Trainer's Guide by Pojo. As it says, unofficial. And I had this specific one when I was growing up. There's a whole bunch of them. It's like maybe like yearly or like twice a year that they were released. And it took me a while because I didn't remember the cover, but I remembered like the pages. So not that like going through the pages is going to help, but like for example, they had like a top 50 card section for the time, and I remember like this exact design. I remember everything about this specifically. So I was like, well, why do I have a Pojo magazine that I don't know anything about? I had to find the one that I had. And this one's in really, really good shape. I mean, it's got like a little bit of like wear and tear around the edges for a magazine that's, almost 20 years old, but like the crossword puzzle, the word search in the back are completely unused. The pages are all in really good shape. So I paid a little bit more for it than I wanted to. I think it was like $10 for a magazine. That is not really worth anything, but I was happy to get it. I was, it's cool. It's a cool piece that reminds me like very specifically of my childhood. I remember like doing the word search or doing like the crossword. Like I remember being like really little and my mom was like getting her nails done and I had to come with her because I couldn't stay home alone. And I remember like going through the magazine and reading everything Yu-Gi-Oh. Like, I mean, if it isn't clear, right? If it wasn't clear last week talking about Yu-Gi-Oh, but I grew up loving Yu-Gi-Oh, so definitely in the spirit of being obsessed with it growing up and talking about it and thinking about it and playing it and all that. So yeah, I'm cool. I'm glad I got that magazine, which is it's pretty cool. So now getting into actual games, what I will say is that you can assume every game in this episode is developed and published by Konami. Konami is also responsible for the card game Yu-Gi-Oh! I don't think there's anything here that wasn't developed or published by Konami, but yeah, you can take that as an assumption. Also, every game in this episode, except for the first one, which didn't have promo cards, all of the games in this episode are complete with their promo cards. So I think I talked about it last week, maybe in the Japanese episode, but basically every Yu-Gi-Oh game, almost every Yu-Gi-Oh game that was released here in North America came with promo cards as a nice little bonus to what you were getting. So a lot of these games, in this episode, none of these games came with their promo cards, but I was able to go into TCG Player and get all the cards for cheap. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, all these games are complete with their promos, except for the first one, which is Yu-Gi-Oh! Online, which is a PC game. It's an online PC game released everywhere in April 2005, which is, as you would expect, an online dueling game. So it was literally Yu-Gi-Oh! Online. You could play with people around the world, and it had a ranking system that wasn't necessarily unique for 2005, but definitely fleshed out, very fleshed out for Yu-Gi-Oh!, which was like kind of at its height back then, but like for the first, I'm pretty sure the first online Yu-Gi-Oh game, it was very fleshed out, so that was pretty cool to have. But the biggest downside to Yu-Gi-Oh! Online is that you needed to pay to be able to duel around the world, which makes sense, right? It makes sense that you had to pay for the online service, but I don't really know what the cost was. I tried looking it up, and I think right before I had looked this up, it was like it came out to something that was like 10 cents a duel, but you didn't pay in the game. You had to pay like, you had to go to like Toys R Us and buy like dual pass points, like a gift card almost, like that what we would consider like Roblox cards today, right? So you had to go to like Toys R Us, GameStop, buy the points there, and then put in the code in the game, and that's how you dueled. So it came out to like 10 cents a duel, which like doesn't sound all that bad. But if you're obsessed with Yu-Gi-Oh, which I was definitely obsessed with Yu-Gi-Oh, I probably could have burned like several $100s just dueling around the world, right? You're playing with people from everywhere. So I don't know. It's not a great way of going about it. I mean, it was the first try that they had at it, right? But like, kind of weird that you had to pay for every single duel. I think you got like 10 free duels to start. So, it was a good start, but yeah, definitely I can see this dying out pretty quickly. The game contained cards through the set Invasion of Chaos, which is a set I remember opening packs from back in the day, which is pretty cool. So, I mean, I know most of the cards from early Yu-Gi-Oh! Just because that's what I grew up with. But I definitely would have played that because it was like right in the era of me opening cards, me dueling with friends. So, yeah, I definitely would have played that. It was cool, going through the Invasion of Chaos set again and being like, oh, I remember this card, I remember this card. So I think I had opened one booster box when I was younger. I think I got like one for Christmas or my birthday, and I remember opening packs from that. And I don't know, I don't think it was Invasion of Chaos, but I remember it very vividly. Invasion of Chaos was the 9th TCG set that was released here in North America. Definitely not the first in Japan, but I think it was the 9th one here. But it was the first release in 2004, and the game was released in 2005, so there was a pretty big layoff from the time that it was released here in North America to the time it was released in the game. We kind of see it every so often that like when Yu-Gi-Oh games are made, it's like the layoff between when the set is released versus when the game is released, it like gets shorter over time. But yeah, 2004 in North America, sorry, set was released in 2004 in North America, so it was released even earlier in Japan, but the game didn't come out for everybody until April 2005, so definitely a long time in between, and apparently no updates that they would have been able to do. So I don't know, kind of weird. There's 2 sequels to Yu-Gi-Oh! Online, the second of which its servers shuttered in late 2012, but there have been other attempts to online Yu-Gi-Oh! Games. Most specifically, Master Duel is the most popular one now. Not most popular, the only one now. Definitely seems to be the most longest term, like sustainable. It's the most sustainable version of it. It's on, I'm pretty sure it's on PC, but I know it's on like all modern systems. I haven't played it yet. Playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Today is just, I don't know, very different. Too many mechanics, and the game's kind of weird. I think there's options to play kind of like a legacy mode with like all old cards that I would have grown up with, but I haven't really taken the time to look into it. But if you are interested in playing Yu-Gi-Oh! With people around the world, Master Duel on all modern systems, Xbox, PS4 and 5, Switch. I know it's on Switch. I have it downloaded on Switch. I just haven't played it yet. But same thing there. You also have to pay for points and get points to be able to duel. So yeah, I don't know. It's cool. But yeah, the first Yu-Gi-Oh! Online game. There's 3 other PC games I think that were released as a trio. I don't have those yet, but I got the first one. So next up, speaking of Xbox, we have Dawn of Destiny on Xbox. So this is also a dueling game initially released in America in 2004. March 2004, and then it was released in Europe in November 2004, and it's weird because it was never released in Japan, so it came to America first, or released in America first, then went to Europe, but never went to Japan, and I'm pretty sure that is the only time this has ever happened in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Series, that a game was never released in Japan, that it's a non-Japan exclusive, right? It's a Japanese franchise. That's crazy, right? The other thing that's also interesting about this, that it's the first and only to do. It's the only physical game released on Xbox systems. So I just said Master Duel was released on like the Xbox One, Xbox Series systems, right? It's just an online game, but that game never came out physically, and there's no other physical Xbox games for Yu-Gi-Oh! So kind of weird that the first and only Xbox game was an Xbox exclusive, 20 years ago. So that's pretty neat too. It's on par for what you'd expect a dueling game to be, but you specifically play against characters from seasons 1 and 2 of the anime. What season 1 is Duelist Kingdom with like Maximilian Pegasus. Season 2 is Battle City, and it has fully 3D monster sprites, which is pretty normal, what I would expect for a console game in 2004. But like still cool that they took the time to do that. There's a triple battle mode where you can duel against 2 others. Was it 3? I think you battle against 3 other people, so it's like 4 people dueling, but I think it was called triple battle. I realize my notes might be wrong. That's okay. It sounds unique, but I'm pretty sure it was done in other games too. So, kind of neat. But to be completely honest with you, I think I've played an original Xbox once in my entire life. So, not at all nostalgic for it, but it is very interesting for its release history and the fact that it's, an Xbox exclusive and the only one physically released on Xbox. So, that's cool. Weird piece of Xbox history and Yu-Gi-Oh! History. Next up, we're going to move to the Wii, a system I am significantly more nostalgic for, even though I had never played either of these two games. First one is very weird. 5D's Wheelie Breakers. So, this is a racing game initially released in Japan in March 2009, then America in May 2009, and it's the first for the series to be a racing game. It's basically Mario Kart, but the cards are your power-ups. And I'm pretty sure that like racing and motorcycles are a trope of like the 5Ds arc of the anime. I never watched 5Ds. I watched entirely the first arc of the anime, like the Yugi and Joey arcs, like Battle Sadie, Duelist Kingdom. But GX I watched for maybe like a little bit. So it was original Yu-Gi-Oh!, then the GX arc, and then the 5Ds arc. I watched like maybe like a month of the GX arc, so I know nothing about 5Ds. It's kind of funny, but like I do think that racing is like a trope of the 5Ds arc. Like I said, I never watched it, so I could be totally wrong. Like a lot of games in this era, it's able to connect to DS games. So for example, like Pokemon Battle Revolution, you can connect Diamond and Pearl to Battle Revolution, and same thing here. The game that this can connect to, the DS game this can connect to, we may or may not talk about later in the episode. But it's kind of interesting that when you connect it, it gives you dueling points. That we've been talking about dueling points, not quite the same thing, but it gives you points that you could use to purchase cards. And the weird part too is that when you connect the DS game to this game, it gives you access to purchase two other cards, Dark Resonator and Blue Eyes White Dragon. Which, first of all, let's talk about that. Those two cards are very weird. Blue Eyes White Dragon makes so much sense, but Dark Resonator, why not like Dark Magician or Red Eyes Black Dragon? Games that were more iconic than Dark Resonator. To me, it doesn't make sense that Blue Eyes would be available and not like Dark Magician. Weird. But the even weirder part is that it's not only that do you get them, because you don't get them, you get access to purchase them. Like it unlocks them in the store. You don't even get them to like your case to be able to add them to decks. So that's really, really weird. I don't know. It's kind of funny. But the follow-up to Wheelie Breakers is a little bit more traditional, and that is 5D's Dual Transer. So this is a dueling game on the Wii that was surprisingly, this is weird release history. It was first released in Europe in November 2010, but it was released as Master of the Cards, not necessarily Dual Transer. And then it came to America 2 weeks later, so I'm pretty sure still November 2010, maybe early December 2010. But then it didn't get to Japan until 4 months later in 2011. So that's really weird. That first of all, Europe exclusive for 2 weeks, but first released in Europe, but then didn't come to Japan until the very last place of release, and it took 4 months from initial release to Japan release. So that's also really, really weird too. It's a dueling game, right? Not a racing game. It's got elements of the 5D's anime, but lots of the names and themes are taken from Norse mythology, which is pretty interesting. Like the game is set on the island, in a building called Yggdrasil, and on the island of Ragnarok. And you also get to play Odin later in the game. Like you could duel against him later in the game. So not that I'm like super familiar with Norse mythology, but I'm aware of Yggdrasil, Ragnarok, and Odin. But it's also not the first time Yu-Gi-Oh! Has done something like that. Like, for example, Duelist of the Roses is based on, like, the War of the Roses from, like, medieval times, like, Europe. So not the first time that they've used, like, real-world stuff or, like, not real-world stuff, Norse mythology, right? But, like, references to real concepts in the... I don't know. I think you understand what I'm trying to say. But it's also kind of interesting because I stopped playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, very early on in elementary school and then like focus more on Pokemon. But when I came back to Yu-Gi-Oh! The first time, I had like a renaissance in like middle school or like late elementary school that I came back to it. and one of the first sets I came back to buy cards from was Storm of Ragnarok. So this game was released in 2010, and trying to think of where I was in like spring 2011. I think it actually matches like the set like Storm of Ragnarok was released, and I was probably back into Yu-Gi-Oh around that time. So pretty neat for that too, that like this is very contemporary for when I got back into Yu-Gi-Oh. It's also like the Wii era. Like I definitely had a Wii and was playing the Wii a lot in 2010, 2011. So yeah, that's pretty cool. But more about the game. There's Wi-Fi capability to play with people around the world, and get this, it's a dueling game that can connect to the internet so you could play with people around the world, but it was free. Not like Yu-Gi-Oh! Online, not like Master Duel. You could duel with people around the world for free. That's fantastic. And also, not only that, the game could get updated, so you could get updated ban lists. So around this time, I think ban lists were being released every 3 months, every 6 months, like changing the metagame to like, cards that are too strong, taking them out. But yeah, you could update the ban list. Like GBA games, whatever ban list they coded into, that's just the one you're getting. That's it. But yeah, not with Dual Transer. You could stay pretty up to date for the time that it was released, which is really, really neat. It's probably best described, like story-wise, it's best described as like you clearing out Silph in Kanto. Like, so if you're playing like Gen 1 Pokemon and you have to do like the Silph like side quest, not really a side quest because you have to do it, but like part of the story, right? And that's kind of what you're doing in Dual Transer. You're clearing out Yggdrasil. So that's kind of neat. But the replayability here is actually fantastic. Like, forget about the fact that it's online and you can play with people around the world. The post-game is also crazy. So once you beat the game, you get another dungeon that you could battle with people, and it contains unlockable characters for people that you know, like characters that you would know from the anime. But you also duel against them, and their decks are like crazy, also like super broken. So they might have like 3 copies of a card you're only allowed to have 1 copy of, or they might have 3 copies of a card that you're not allowed to have in your deck at all. So the decks were like super broken, super hard to beat, but that actually made it very replayable, so that like it became a real challenge to beat, which normally I think games that are overly difficult I probably just don't want to play. But if I was playing this in 2011, I probably would be like, okay, we got to figure this out. Or in 2011, I might have just given up, but not the point. So definitely pretty neat part to Dual Transer. The Japanese version of this game also had a special edition that came with a card scanner that I 100% want to get at some point. I think the only one on eBay right now is like $90, which isn't that bad. But like that, it comes in like this humongous box because the scanner is humongous. It's not like this tiny little thing. So I don't know. At some point I'll get that, but I'm glad that I at least have the game in English. So that's that. And then the last 3 games we're going to talk about are all games on the same system. And if you watched RGC, the Retro Game Con video, I got 4 of the Yu-Gi-Oh games that were released on DS. So out of the 7, I got 4 at RGC, and I have the last 3 here. So we're going to talk about those last 3 games. So the first one is Nightmare Troubadour, which is a dueling game based on the Battle City arc of the anime, and was initially released in Japan in July 2005, and then came to America only a month later in August 2005. And what you actually see over time, like I kind of talked about it earlier with like release of games in different areas, but basically over time, the release from Japanese game to English game got shorter and shorter over time. So only a month between releases from Japan to America is like really, really good. It's the first Yu-Gi-Oh! DS game, and I thought it was really interesting that it's the first Yu-Gi-Oh! DS game, because I'm thinking DS, I'm thinking like definitely would be like GX era at this time. But no, it was still in the Battle City arc, which to me, I was like, why are we still in Battle City when we're on the DS? But it kind of makes sense, because I think about the time this was released in 2005, I'm pretty sure the Battle City arc was still like the most popular. I don't think we were necessarily in GX territory yet. I could be totally wrong, but yeah, I thought it was weird initially, but then like it kind of makes sense when I think back to like timeline of Yu-Gi-Oh events. It had a ton of Season 1 characters, people like Maximilian Pegasus. That name kind of sounds familiar, but they also cut out my boys like Tristan Taylor and Duke Devlin. Like, why? Of all the characters you cut out, like Duke Devlin's literally in the Battle City arc, and then Tristan is like a main character. I don't know, very weird. There's not a lot of added functionality from like the GBA dueling games, but there's plenty of quality life improvements now that you have 2 screens to work with, so you're not trying to do everything on just one screen. Having 2 screens can go a really, really long way. Also added some special 3D summoning animations for popular iconic and signature monsters like Dark Magician and Blue Eyes and the Egyptian God card. So not only do you just play them like you normally would, but then they get their own animation, which is pretty unique. Also interesting because Nintendo and Konami was still supporting the GBA by the time this game was released. So again, this was the first Yu-Gi-Oh game released on DS, but that doesn't mean that the GBA games had stopped. After this game was released, there were 2 more, I think, released on GBA. So there was this one in 2005, and then I think 2 more were released in 2006 on GBA, something to that effect. Yeah, and I think those last 2 games were GX Arc, which would make sense, Battle City, and then after that came the GX Arc. I think I got that right. But speaking of GX, we're going to completely skip over the GX Arc and go back to the 5Ds arc with 5Ds World Championship 2010, Reverse of Arcadia World Championships 2010. Also a dueling game, initially released in February 2010 in both Japan and America. And they were released 5 days apart. So I don't know what happened there that they were only 5 days apart. Obviously, the games were developed in tandem. I guess Japan just could not wait and wanted to be first. I don't know, I think that's kind of funny. But it's incredibly fleshed out, right? Like, Nightmare Troubadour was released in 2005. This is released 2010. So obviously 5 years of development made a really big difference to the Yu-Gi-Oh franchise for games. It's a really fleshed out storyline, but it's in chapters, but the chapters are based on the 5Ds anime. So when I was trying to read about the story, I could not follow. Like I don't know the characters at all, so trying to read what was happening, I had no clue what was going on. Of course, I'm just here trying to make a video, so very neat at the very least. But yeah, they did also have Wi-Fi capability to rank against other players and get a daily downloadable card. So, kind of in the era of, this was released around the same time as like Dual Transfer, so Wi-Fi capability to battle other people, definitely, a staple to Yu-Gi-Oh! In like the early 2010s, late 2000s. But also the idea of getting a daily downloadable card is pretty cool. I mean, it's kind of like, getting anything for free in today's like games, like your daily free content. So I don't know, still cool, neat. Obviously can't do any of that now. I'm sure the servers are down, but still neat nonetheless. And with that said, we get to the very last game of this episode, and this is 5Ds over the Nexus World Championships 2011. So it's kind of weird. 5Ds Reverse of Arcadia was released 5 days apart in Japan and in America, but for Over the Nexus, it was released in Japan in February 2011, but then it didn't come to America until May 2011. We were the last to get the game, so I don't know how 2010 was 5 days apart, and then this is like 3 months apart. And even beyond that, Korea got the game before we did. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's kind of weird. It's basically just Reverse of Arcadia updated. It's this mostly the same game, just like slightly different story. I think the story is like an alternate timeline where, actually I don't even remember. My notes don't even say it. I have no idea. But the most interesting part to Over the Nexus is I haven't really talked about like the amount of games that were available. Sorry, the amount of cards available in each game. I mentioned in Yu-Gi-Oh! Online that was up to a set called Invasion of Chaos, and that was roughly like 1,000 cards at the time. But Over the Nexus is like almost all of them. So there's a whopping 4,231 playable cards. So again, under 1,000 for Yu-Gi-Oh! Online in 2005, and then 6 years later we have 4,231 cards available. So that's a really big jump. It's most of the cards, I'm pretty sure, if not all the cards. So that's pretty neat that we finally got all the cards in a game. I mentioned like Storm of Ragnarok before, but I'm pretty sure that this game also had cards available through Storm of Ragnarok. So that makes a lot of sense too. Yeah, I don't know. But it's also the last game in the World Championships line. So I think like summer in review, I don't know. There's a video, I guess, over the summer. I talked about me getting World Championships 2004 on GBA. And we also had, a couple of the World Championships games from the Retro GameCon video. Reverse of Arcadia was 2010. So this is the last game in the World Championships line. First game was 2004 on GBA, and the last game here over the Nexus is 2011. So that's kind of interesting. But it's also, not only is the last World Champs game, it's also the last game released on the DS for Yu-Gi-Oh! So for that reason, it's the most expensive Yu-Gi-Oh! Game out there, I'm pretty sure. Not necessarily most expensive complete in box if you consider promos, but most expensive, like, just base game. I think the game alone is like $70, let alone like the case. So yeah, pretty neat. But yeah, now I have all the Yu-Gi-Oh! DS games. So like I said, there's 7 of them. I got 4 of them in the Retro GameCon video. I got the last 3 here. So now I have all 7. And there's also one more. There's a Japan-only card almanac, which I talked about in a video probably over a year ago. It's probably almost 2 years ago, but it was Japan-only card almanac in the GX era that just went over like all the cards that were available and like tips and tricks as to what you could do. I have that. Obviously, this isn't it's not a new game. So, but now I have at least one version of all 8 DS games that were released. Next up would be to get the mainline DS games in Japanese, but my wallet's kind of on fire. These 3, my wallet's on fire. That's okay. We'll do that at a later time. So, with that said, that is almost all the Yu-Gi-Oh! Games that we need to talk about, but there might be one more episode coming soon. Next week about a different system that we have not talked about yet. I mentioned it in this episode, but I have not shown any games from it. I also don't think I showed any games of it in the Retro GameCon video. So stay tuned for that next week. And with that said, I just want to give a huge thank you to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Wiki and GameFAQs. Yu-Gi-Oh! Wiki's got every piece of information about these games that I need. GameFAQs is fantastic for like release data, because sometimes Yu-Gi-Oh! Wiki is not necessarily right, but it's okay. But yeah, thank you so much for those 2 sites, because I would not have been able to make a video about this without them. So with that said, thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something. And if there's anything I got wrong, please correct me or add info. I would love to continue learning about these games, hopefully as much as I have taught you something. So with that said, it's time to bye. I can't believe I just did that.